Hi, I'm Margie Ong, the CEO of Thoughts in Gear, and you're listening to Gut Talks, double G U double T.
Hi, I'm Maria. Thank you for listening, and make sure you subscribe, like, and leave a comment. And don't forget to watch the full episode. Thanks again for listening to Gut Talks.
We've created a new bucket for our customers, and it's called Not in Compliance GRI. And what that bucket is we tell them, get started on the journey. Even if you cannot do the most minimum in compliance, even if you pick 5 indicators, do that, right? So do that, pick the 5 indicators, and you're not in compliance, but that's absolutely fine because you're still guided by that global standard. You're still adopting the language. You're still using the terminology. And over time, it will build that familiarity with the framework. And so that's in the kind of in the do. And then finally, in the tell, which is, and we often say that's a phase that we leave to the very end because you tell the story of what you've done. Try not to start with the telling, although oftentimes we do go into projects where it's like, how do I report on sustainability? So the tell part at the very end is about their reporting and their storytelling about how far they've come and what they've done.
So I guess the tell part includes the measure, or the measure would be after?
The measure is typically in the do. So oftentimes we ask them, and in fact, we give them a cycle for their reporting, where the reporting starts even before the financial year. So if you think about your fiscal reporting, right? You have 3 months before the start of the financial year. You prepare your projections for next year. You prepare your budget. You have huge cross-department meetings and business planning in order to be able to plan for the following year. We encourage them to mirror that process with their sustainability process. So plan what you're going to do next year. Look at the indicators and the measurements. So if you know you're going to measure your waste, you know you're going to measure your level of emissions for next year. If you break that down into specifics and you plan that with the rest of the departments across your company, everyone will be able to take actions towards that direction and measure towards it throughout the year. So that's oftentimes in the do. But you're right, it's very, very important in the tell because, and this is where a lot of companies are. If you do the best initiatives, but you're not reporting it in a way, unfortunately, that the market can understand, you're not going to get due credit as a company for it. And that's where, importantly, global standards are important, protocols are important. It's important to know what to report and how to report it in order to be able to address your investors, your regulators, your customers, and also carry that through to storytelling, right? Which brings us to, I won't even start on greenwashing, but that brings us to a whole other concern.
I've been trying not to talk about this right now, but this is coming up because you said the measure comes in the do, but the tell is equally important. And I guess all your process lasts 3 to 4 years, right? From my understanding, all of this.
No, that entire 4 phases, we've placed it, depending on, we always say depending on how much appetite or how aggressively a company can adopt it. But all of that is meant to happen within 12 months.
Okay.
So between one sustainability report to the next.
Okay. So, and here comes this into place. So you said sometimes they're like, people or individuals in organizations are not always aware that they are somehow sustainable, right? In their processes and so on, but also more maybe into their activities. And I always give this example. And when I did the podcast, the episode with Ravi Chidambaram, I think it was one of the first episodes. I asked this question because this is what happens. Like you have for Christmas, for instance, you have Christmas jumpers initiatives where everyone buys a Christmas jumper from X nonprofit, and this is something to talk about. Or planting trees. This is like a new trend, right? It's been there for a while, but you sign up, you pay $1 or whatever, and you plant a tree somewhere, or you have a tree on your name. But so. How can the general public differentiate between communication, PR, CSR exercises, and real impact?
That's really hard. Mm-hmm. It's really hard for the general consumer to know. And in fact, even a very well-educated consumer, it's really hard for them to tell for a number of reasons. The first reason is it really depends on the level of disclosure of that company. So if they make a claim and one of the things that we include in our workshop are examples of adverts that are misguided and that have been banned by the advertising authorities. For example, an airline claiming to be, the lowest emission airline, et cetera, they measure it based on one metric as opposed to the company as a whole. So it's little things like that that make it really hard for the consumer to tell. However, having said that, I think first we're getting much more informed consumers. I'm so energized by our young generation.
Yeah.
And I must say, that includes you, of course, that, you guys are going to be the difference. Once those of us who are much older and, we kind of hand over our baton to the younger generation, I have a lot of faith that things will move towards being highly sustainable because the younger generation seem to be very driven by this need to live within our planetary boundaries because it is a matter of survival, unfortunately, for the next few generations. And so I think the consumer is very much becoming much more educated. They're informing themselves. And alongside that, there are bodies that are helping inform them. So things like certification bodies, as long as they're not, fake certification bodies, things like even labels on products, right? So labeling, if you compare our nutrition label today to even 5-10 years ago, it has a lot more information today than it ever did before. Organizations like Fair Trade, et cetera, if carried out well, helps to inform the consumer. So these are agencies or organizations that can help me as a consumer trust that organization as opposed to trusting the company themselves to disclose information about themselves. I'm now trusting a third party or a different body to be able to audit and inspect them and tell me that they are trustworthy. So that helps. I think those bodies help. And then oftentimes as well, just very broad regulations, like, for example, when CFC was banned, just broad regulations, I think definitely help in terms of moving this conversation along as well. But oftentimes as well, I tell the companies that they have to be very, very careful because greenwashing is not, and that's why it's so difficult for consumers to really find out, because sometimes, so greenwashing within a company can either be intentional, oftentimes, or sometimes it can actually be accidental as well. They might be touting or they might be marketing certain aspects, thinking that that is the right thing to do or that it's a metric that they want to shout about, not having a larger or wider awareness or realization that that is one part of maybe a larger picture. So I think even that confusion, even within the companies themselves, if they don't have any, if they're still well-intentioned, they could still fall into the category of greenwashing. So also to be very, very careful.